December 3rd, 1964. Below zero cold snap. Engineers huddle around a Chevy C60 dump truck. Its 292 inline 6 hasn't been started in 6 weeks. The oil's like molasses. They jump it and, believe it or not, it just roars to life. No choke, no throttle, just raw Detroit iron, defying physics. This isn't technical specs at a corporate thriller with smoking gun documents and visceral eyewitness accounts. The ending doesn't just ask what if. It proves the cover-up. They were Detroit's dirtiest secret, so brutally overbuilt, they could outlive the trucks they powered. But the untold truth, Ford and Chevy deliberately strangled them. Why? Because these sixes could have killed the V8 and cost them billions. Engineering rivalry, the minds behind the monsters. The 30-year war between Ford and Chevrolet birthed some of the most legendary iron to ever roll off an assembly line. But while muscle cars grabbed headlines and V8s got the glory, deep in the guts of the real working world, two inline sixes were quietly building reputations that would outlive most of the trucks they powered. Chevy struck first, birth of beasts, the engineers who defied management. Ed Cole's 292 team knew they'd built a monster. 7 main bearings, forged crank, 4.125-inch stroke. But when Cole presented dyno sheets showing E400 plus horsepower potential, GM brass slammed the vault shut. Why? A 1963 internal memo leaked in 2001 says it all. 292 output capped at 165 horsepower. Must not exceed base 283 V8. No high revving screams here. This thing grunted like a mule at 2,000 RPM and kept pulling long after your V8 threw a rod. The 292 didn't live in garages. It lived on the job inside tow trucks, farm rigs, delivery vans, and railroad service vehicles. It didn't ask for chrome, just oil and a fresh belt every now and then. In towns across the Midwest and deep into Texas, legends grew. People told stories of 292 running on no coolant, hauling hay across desert flats, or towing campers twice their weight without a grunt of complaint. I had a '69 C10 with a 292. That truck rolled through fires, floods, hell, and divorce court. I wrecked that truck, but that engine still started first crank. Ford's response, the 300. Masterminded by engineer Del Harder's team, father of Ford's OV6s, it was a stroke 240 with a 4-inch bore, larger than the 292, allowing bigger valves for low RPM breathing. Mechanics nicknamed it the Brick for its 485-pound weight. One test engineer's journal entry read, "We ran it at max load for 300 hours. It didn't flinch. The 300 endurance exceeds all projected service life models. Potential performance applications are not recommended at this time." When the 300 arrived, everything changed. It didn't come to win street races or land magazine covers. It came to do work, the kind that breaks men and machines. This wasn't a car engine dressed in truck clothes. It was purpose-built, engineered from the crank up to haul, pull, idle for days, and start cold every single morning without complaint. Ford's design philosophy with the 300 was simple: versatility and longevity. To the untrained eye, the Ford 300 and Chevy 292 were just blue-collar engines born for fleet trucks, delivery vans, and farm duty. But under their grime-covered exteriors lurked engineering so overbuilt, so brilliantly intentional, they weren't just survivors. They were ticking performance time bombs, waiting for someone to unleash them. Ford's 300, with its beefy 4.9-liter displacement, cranked out 265 pound-feet of torque at a lazy 2,000 RPM in its later fuel-injected versions. Though its 150 horsepower didn't exactly scream race car, Chevy's 292, just a hair smaller at 4.8 liters, pushed 165 horsepower at 3,800 RPM and 280 pound-feet at 2,000 RPM in its best factory tune. These weren't peaky, high-rung racers. They were down-low bruisers, tuned to twist axles and move mountains without breaking a sweat. And yet, they could have been so much more. Both engines had cast iron blocks so thick you could weld a bracket to them with a blowtorch and they'd still run cool. The Ford's 7-main bearing crankshaft was so stable, some drag racers swapped them into turbo builds without blinking an eye. Meanwhile, Chevy's lighter 4-main setup gave it better rev potential, especially when balanced and ported. The engineering differences are fascinating. Ford's 300 had a bigger 3.98-inch bore compared to Chevy's 3.76 and a longer 4-inch stroke versus the 292's 3.76. Ford's larger bore gave it a breathing advantage. The 300 could gulp in air like a linebacker after a sprint. It also had larger intake valves, giving it better volumetric efficiency at low speeds. Chevy's 292, however, was all about balance. Its intake manifold was a masterclass in making sure all 6 cylinders got their fair share of air and fuel, avoiding the common inline-6 flaw of starved end cylinders while Ford's exhaust setup cut back pressure with carefully tuned runners, compression ratios. Chevy's 292 ranged from 7.8 to 1 to 8.5 to 1 depending on the year and use, while Ford kept things steady at 8.8 to 1 for efficiency. These weren't random choices, they were dialed in to make these engines reliable workhorses, but with room to grow if you knew how to unlock it. Fuel and ignition evolution. Chevrolet's 292 was a product of simpler times, and it wore that simplicity like a badge of honor. From its birth in 1963 to its final breath in the early 90s, the 292 remained carbureted. Early models ran Rochester single or 2-barrel carbs, dependable but far from refined. By the 1980s, Mexican-built versions were saddled with emissions tweaks, air injection ports, PCV systems, and throttle limiters that strangled its once proud torque curve. Ignition. It all started with those classic point-style distributors, you know, the ones known for their mechanical honesty, but they sure needed a lot of fiddling. By the late 1970s, GM introduced something new, HI, high-energy ignition. It added a bit more reliability, but, well, not much in terms of tuning flexibility. Now where Chevy stuck to its guns, Ford played the long game, and boy did it pay off. The 300 began with Carter and Holley carburetors, just like its rival. But then, in 1987, Ford made a move that changed everything. They introduced TBI, throttle body injection. Suddenly, the inline-6, which once relied on gaskets and guesswork, could now measure airflow, adjust fuel delivery, and trim emissions all on the fly. Alongside TBI came computer-controlled ignition, and that was a real leap forward in precision, starting, and dependability. It meant smoother cold starts, better fuel economy, and no more crawling under the hood to gap points in the rain. The TBI system gave Ford the edge, especially in those fleet and utility markets where emissions mattered more than just brute horsepower. The 292 stayed mechanical, raw, and analog to the end, and that's exactly why gearheads still love it. There's just something satisfying about tuning a car by ear, tweaking timing with a twist of the distributor, and hearing the old beast respond like a loyal dog. But the 300, it paved the road to the future. Its computer brain and precise fuel metering didn't just extend its life. They made it relevant deep into the 1990s, in a world that no longer tolerated unburned hydrocarbons or unreliable cold starts. Durability and real-world abuse. And man, were they built to last. The Chevy 292 wasn't just built, it was forged like a sledgehammer designed to swing forever. This wasn't an engine that whispered, it growled, and underneath that growl was the kind of engineering that made it nearly unkillable. At the heart of the 292 toughness was its cast iron block reinforced like a bridge support. It used 7 massive main bearings, yes, 7, to cradle the crankshaft like a vault holds treasure. That extra support spread the stress across the entire bottom end, eliminating flex and preventing catastrophic failure, even under brutal towing conditions or steep climbs with a fully loaded flatbed. The 292 long stroke was no accident. At